Hello, fellow humans. Chris here again. So, today is Martin Luther King Day. It is the day that we celebrate the life of the great Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, his actual birthday was January 15th, but we always round our holidays to Monday so that we can enjoy a 3 day weekend, which in and of itself I've always had a little bit of an issue with. I feel that if we're going to honor somebody and remember somebody or whatever the occasion may be, we should really have the day focused on that as opposed to extending our weekend. And part of what goes along with that is the lack of remembering what that person was really about. And in this case, something that's always bothered me about the history and the remembrance of Martin Luther King Jr. Is that a lot of what he was about is really forgotten or just ignored. You know, when I grew up, we learned about Martin Luther King. It was all about the racism. It was all about the Montgomery bus boycotts and the I Have a Dream speech, which is great. I mean, that is what defined his legacy, but there's a lot of other stuff that's missed. And one of the things that I always see come up is conservatives trying to claim him somehow because he was a Baptist minister, a man of God. Some even go so far as to claim that he was Republican, which is completely untrue. Nobody can provide any proof for that. He was actually apolitical, wouldn't endorse political candidates or presidential candidates or anything like that. But if you take all that out of it, political party, whatever he may have been registered as, looking at his policies, he was a socialist. He was a pure socialist. And I find it hypocritical of this country to be holding him up to such a high standard, to somebody that we all look up to, which we should, by the way. It's warranted. But we shun socialism as a nation. If you look at the Democratic Party today, on a whole, they reject socialism. The the one candidate that came closest to being a socialist was completely ostracized and alienated from the Democratic Party, and was effectively written off by the mainstream population of progressives in this country. And I just find that kind of hypocritical. If you look at what Martin Luther King actually stood for, aside from racism, aside from civil rights, equal rights, he was staunchly opposed to the Vietnam War before it was popular, before it was the the majority of Americans who believed that. He was against Lyndon B. Johnson during that period, and that was not a popular view to take at the time. He has a long history of socialistic views. He had a letter in 1952 to Coretta Scott where he claimed himself to be much more socialist than capitalist, and he actually believed that capitalism had run its course and was no longer useful in our society. He was staunchly anti-poverty. He wanted expansion of public housing. He wanted a universal health care system. He wanted a mandatory living wage. If you notice, a lot of these things, they still don't exist. And in fact, they are considered wild, radical, left-wing socialist views. And this was going on almost 60 years ago that he was talking about this stuff. So it's great that we remember him and that we honor his legacy, but we need to recognize that we have not come anywhere close to the vision that he actually had for his country, for the betterment of our society. One of the things that he talked about as he progressed through the 50s and into the 60s, after the civil rights era, he really started getting into poverty, and he talked about the fallacy of opportunity. he had an issue with the idea of opportunity versus guarantees. He said, what's the good in being able to sit at the table if you can't afford a hamburger? And so I just like to make sure that we remember that and acknowledge that as much as we like to say, post on Facebook a quote that Martin Luther King said and talk about how great of a man he was and somebody to look up to, and if only he could see where we were at today. We need to acknowledge who he was and what he believed in, and really maybe look inside ourselves and ask ourselves why we're so opposed to all the things that he stood for. By the way, a big part of what he was about was civil disobedience, nonviolence, nonviolent, peaceful protest. Taking a knee for the national anthem springs to mind as an idea, as an example of nonviolent, peaceful protest. And look what happened there. We have not come nearly as far as we think or we should have come by now. So just something to think about. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll be talking to you again really soon. Thanks a lot, and remember, don't be afraid to question the consensus.